Uh, Good afternoon, everyone present here. Today, on the occasion of World Mental Health Day, we have an esteemed speaker amongst us, Dr. Ethnocentrism, who is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology in Kamala Nehru College at Delhi University. She has an experience of 8 years working as an assistant professor. She has been awarded Junior Research Fellowship and Doctorate in Clinical Psychology by the University of Delhi. For her research work in autism, depression, positive psychology, and gender experiences such as skin color bias, body image issues, sexism, and feminist identity, she has published a number of publications in reputed journals. Being a feminist herself, she has offered a lot of lectures at various schools and institutions, and she's actively involved in raising awareness about mental health, gender, and feminism. Neurodiversity is in fact one of her most recent areas of interest. Apart from this, she is also an animal welfare enthusiast and she contributes towards many social causes, including children's civil and human rights, educational and mental and health welfare. Today, she'll be sharing with us her insights on the topic mental health in an unequal world concerning neurodiversity as a factor. Now, I request you to take over the session, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the very warm introduction that you've just given me, Jayashree, and also the very beautiful poem that a student read before you. I think that was just very beautiful. So World Mental Health Day, which was yesterday, but we are celebrating the entire month almost, and hopefully we celebrated the entire year. We don't want it to be just like a birthdays. We celebrated one day and forget about it the next day. So the theme this year is mental health in an unequal world. And I'm just going to start talking about it, but I'd like to share my screen first. Is this okay? Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Perfect. So where do I start from? Okay. I have worked in the area of autism, and I know quite a few people who have autism. Because of my research work in the area of autism, I've met a lot of families, children ranging from 5 years of age, 4 years of age to about, let's say, 30, 35 years of age. And I have quite a few friends who have ADHD and dyslexia and comorbid conditions, you know. And I want to talk about neurodiversity. So when I was asked to speak about this theme, neurodiversity in an unequal world, a lot of people, I think, and this is the theme that a lot of universities have taken up this year, but I'm not sure how many people are talking about neurodiversity. So when you talk about the unequal world, we are definitely referring to the diversity that we have in this world. So we have people who speak many different languages. It's very common for me to move into Hindi while I'm speaking, while I'm giving my lectures. I don't even realize that. And I'm very, very careful right now that I should not delve into Hindi. And if I do, please point it out. Okay, so there are lots of people who speak different languages, people who have belong to different social different social castes, gender, sexuality, religion, race, etc. But all these identities come with its own set of privileges or marginalization. So how do I position myself if I talk about my gender? There is a privilege experienced by men in our society that women don't. For instance, I have never heard any one of my colleagues, male colleagues, call up home and say that, oh, and inquired about their child. Have they slept? Have they eaten? Have they come back from school? Have they taken their medicine? Have they done their homework? I've never seen any of my male colleagues call up. But my female colleagues have almost, especially when they have children that are young, at a really young age, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, I've seen them go through a lot of guilt. The guilt of not being able to be fully in their work setup and the guilt of leaving their child behind, which is a guilt that I do not see my male colleagues experience. Does that mean the fathers in our society love their children any lesser than the mothers do? No, but they are privileged to not be calling up every single day, not be calling up while they are at work. They're privileged because if a woman goes out while her child is sick, they'll call her selfish. But if a man goes out while the child is sick, they'll call it a big, huge sacrifice. So if you see, I'm just taking this as an example to talk about the inequality, diversity, and how certain identities are more privileged over the others. So if you just look at this, you'll see that even though you from the outside, it might see that men and women are starting from the same point, women have a lot more roadblocks on their way to their success than do men, or whatever their goal is. So they have the burden of domestic chores and responsibilities, which is not shared by the opposite gender, right? And this is just an example. You can take up language. In our country, certain language are privileged over the others. For instance, I think Hindi-speaking people are cocky enough to assume that why don't South Indian people talk in Hindi? Why can't they learn Hindi, right? And if you ask them the same question, why can't you learn Tamil, Telugu, or any other language from South India? It never crosses our mind. Similarly, English. So if, at least this is an experience in North India, that if there is a person who's speaking in, let's say, broken English, we tend to judge them. But if we have a foreigner, a white person who's speaking in broken Hindi, we tend to find it very cute. So to know English in our country is a huge privilege, huge privilege. It opens gates to too many places. So all in all, while the time does not permit me to get into all forms of marginalization and oppression and how they affect our mental health, I do want to pick up one of them. Like I said, a lot of people over the world have probably spoken about how these being in an unequal world, especially you mentioned pandemic. So the experience of pandemic has been, everyone says that we are in this together, we are in this together. But fact of the matter is, social distancing is a privilege. If I live in Dharavi, if I live in a one bedroom place where the kitchen, the drawing room, there's no segregation. It's a very small place, and there are 5, 7, 10 people living in that small place. Do I really have the privilege of social distancing? Not really. So when we say we're all in this together, we definitely tend to forget that all of us are in a storm, but some of us are in a ship, some of us are in a yacht, and others are just on a wooden plank trying to kind of survive the storm. So I would have loved to speak about more aspects of inequality and how it contributes to our mental health. But today I'm going to take up something that is really close to my heart, which is neurodiversity. So if I ask you this question, sorry, I should go back. Yes. Which out of your 5 fingers would you be okay getting removed? So if you look at your hand, which out of your 5 fingers would you be? Please feel free to use the chat box for any comments, any questions, anything that you want to share amongst yourselves also. Which out of your 5 fingers would you be okay? Okay, you can remove the index finger. I don't really use it. Or pinky finger. I don't even use it. Thumb, not so much. I think I would need my thumb. So if I give you a choice, which one would you remove? I'm not sure what the silence
is. Pinky finger.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm assuming that would be the least important.
Okay.
In picking up objects and stuff.
All right. Someone's messaged me none of my fingers. I like them all. Would you fight for none of your fingers? Or would you be like, if push comes to shove, I must think something. I must wake up and answer, okay, pinky finger. Most of you would say, I need them all. I can't part with any one finger. Of course not. So what does that mean? Let me ask you another question. Are all your fingers same? Are they the same?
No.
No. Your fingers are different from each other. All of them are different from each other, right? But will you say that they are equal? Equal in value, equal in importance that they hold for you?
Yes.
Most of you would say
Yes.
that most of you would say that all your 5 fingers, while not being similar, they are equal, and you will not like to part with any of these fingers. If we are not ready to part with diversity on our hands, how is it that when we live in a society, we often tend to think diversity means that someone has to be better and someone has to be worse? It is a very interesting human quality, if you think, that whenever we experience differences among, in our society, we do not tend to think of, wow, this is so beautiful, she's so different from all of us. We tend to say she's so weird, she's so is she mad, is she crazy, or we tend to judge them negatively. There is an othering that has happened. And I do not think anyone comes across someone different and quickly jumps to the conclusion that they are better than us. We have something called ethnocentrism, which means that one of the qualities of our communities is that we tend to evaluate our community, the one that we belong to, as better than other communities. And how the consequences it has at a community level, at a global level, at on a large scale, you all know that. I don't think I need to go into detail. Now, why am I talking about this? I want you to remember this, because I'm going to come back to this, that different is not lesser. I want you to commit this to your mind, because my entire session is going to be about different is not equal to lesser. What is neurodiversity? How many of you have heard of the word neurodiversity before? Nobody's heard of neurodiversity before? Anyone who has? So how many students do we have here? 109. Have you had any background in, so some of you are first year psychology, some of you are second year, some of you are third year, I would assume that. And you are doing BSc psychology, right?
Yes, ma'am. We have all 3 years in the mix.
All 3 years right now. And some of you would even have, so I'm assuming that some are freshers, but few people here have an experience of 2 years, 3 years in psychology. This is the third year in psychology, and you've never come across. I'm very surprised. But it also makes this session all the more important. When I did my research work in autism, I'm sorry to say I'm not very proud of the work that I did, because I ended up replicating the neuropsychological model, which continued to focus on lesser than, impaired. The language that is used is autistic children are lesser than typical children. Thankfully, we're using the word typical. Otherwise, it was normal children. ADHD children are poorer than typical children. Dyslexic children are impaired in. So the language is a checklist of what is missing, what is deficient, what is not there. Now the question, very important question, is whenever we say something is deviant, it is very important for us to establish the norm. What is the norm from which I am being evaluated as lesser and not different, by the way? Okay, what is that norm? What norm are we referring to? What are we looking at? Which becomes different, which becomes lesser but not different. So this has been our history in psychology, in psychiatry, in medical sciences. It's very difficult to define normal. And many times the question of normalcy is a political question. It's about power dynamics in society. I'm going to come to that again, but before that, let me tell you who introduced the term neurodiversity. Neurodiversity was introduced by Judy Singer. She's a sociologist who has Asperger's syndrome. And in 1999, she wrote an article, "Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Your Life? From a Problem with No Name to the Emergence of New Category of Difference." What does this mean? problem with no name to the emergence of new category of difference. Long ago, we didn't have terms like autistic, ADHD. It does dyslexia. It doesn't mean that these conditions didn't exist. We did not have suddenly, after DSM discovered autism, we have autism existing, and autism never existed. Autism has been there for a very long time, as has been ADHD, as has been dyslexia. Okay. It's not a recent mental disorder because of, let's say, vaccination. Mental disorder, I use in quotes, because of vaccination. A lot of people think that vaccination causes autism. It is a fraud. That's not true. It's fake news. Okay. So why can't you be normal is a question that a lot of neurodiverse people experience all the time. Act normal, be normal, look into my eyes when you talk. Why don't you like touches? Why do you not talk like others? Why do you talk like that? Why do you act like that? Why aren't you like others? Why are you so lazy? Why do you procrastinate? Why are you so active? Why can't you be like that? Why can't you be more like that? Why can't you be lesser like that? So the entire conversation is about, why are you not normal? What is normal? What I look like. And it's not very different from asking a gay person or a queer person, why can't you be normal? Because my normal is heterosexuality. Your normal is queer. And one of us has to be wrong, because I, by default, assume that diversity means one is right and one is wrong. Sometimes it is a moral judgment, right and wrong. Okay, that moral, say homosexuality is a sin. It's against our culture. So there is a moral judgment attached to it. This is bad and this is good. Sometimes it's a legal opinion. It is illegal to be homosexual. It was illegal to be homosexual at least 3 years ago in our country. Sometimes it is a psychiatric opinion. It is a psychological opinion. And I'm deliberately using the word opinion over here. What does that mean? In DSM-1 and DSM-2, homosexuality was a disorder until it was removed in DSM-3. And I'll tell you later how it was removed, the story of why it was removed and how it was removed. Until date, gender dysphoria, which is that my biological sex does not align with my social, with my gender identity. This is not to say that gender dysphoria does not come with its own set of psychological struggles. It does, and how. But let me ask you this question. So gender dysphoria, when you ask psychiatrists or psychologists, why do we include gender dysphoria as a mental disorder? In US, you need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to go through sex reassignment surgery. I have to prove that I'm extremely depressed, hopeless and suicidal because of being born with a biological sex that doesn't assign with my gender identity. So, and the first thing that comes to my mind, and you can give me a counter argument if you have any, that would be great. I'd love to hear it out, is that, so we're talking about extreme emotional psychological distress experienced by someone whose biological sex does not assign with gender identity. Now, my question is, where is this psychological distress coming from? Is it coming from the fact that I have a penis, but I identify as a woman? Or is it coming from the fact that I've been bullied, harassed, rejected by my family, abandoned by my family? I have experienced violence. I have experienced discrimination. I have experienced self-loathing, because normal for the world is gender binary. There is psychological distress that comes because of many reasons. For instance, in North India, I don't know how it is in South, if a child, at least in my time, if a child wasn't taking engineering or medical, it was considered to be huge. It was considered to be very abnormal. It was considered to be, there would be a lot of distress the parents would be going through. I've had friends who are counselors who were told that, why don't you counsel this child so that he elects and opts for engineering and prepares for engineering medical entrances. And come to another thing. The moment any child tells their parent that, listen, I want to marry outside my caste, I want to marry outside my religion, I don't want to marry at all. For women, I don't want to marry at all. I don't want to have kids as a woman. I am attracted to same sex. What happens? What is the kind of distress that is experienced, the nature and intensity of distress experienced by parents? What kind of dysphoria is that? Why don't we have a disorder that would be parent dysphoria? Let's say, for example, I'm giving you an analogy. Then why do we have gender dysphoria, specific kind of psychological distress being given a label of mental illness and mental disorder? Is it really a mental disorder? Are we repeating history when we had homosexuality as a mental disorder, and psychologists replicated the power dynamics in society by suggesting conversion therapy as curing homosexuality? Are we trying to cure diversity, naturally occurring diversity in human beings? Are you with me so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. And let's move ahead now. Neurodiversity is the notion that all these conditions that you've heard as mental illness, dimagi bimari, Hindi mein bolte hain, in Hindi we say, or mental disorders like autism, dyslexia, ADHD, they are not mental disorders. It reflects the diversity of brain wiring. It's a cognitive variation in the way a brain is wired. And that has its own strengths and its own limitations. Just like my brain. I have a neurotypical brain. I have some things that I can do. I have some things that I cannot do, for sure. My dog can hear sounds that my brain can't. Am I deficient in doing what my dog's brain can and my brain can't? Or am I just different by virtue of being a different species? Similarly, what people with ADHD do is very different. How their brain works is different from how the brain of a neurotypical person brain works. So the entire paradigm shifts over here. We are moving from mental disorders paradigm to neurodiversity paradigm. We are talking about having, for example, different operating systems. I have a Mac. You may have Windows. Do we have to compare and say Windows and Mac, which one is better? Can we not just say that both are good enough and whatever you like, you can use, you can check out both of them? For Windows to be good, does Mac have to be bad? Or for Mac to be good, does Windows have to be bad? Why can't we have both? Isn't that what human diversity is about? Do we have to eliminate differences? And in this category, are we eliminating differences through a notion of mental disorders and illnesses that we've constructed? Okay, so think about this. Neurodiversity says, neurodiversity paradigm says, ADHD, not a disease. I'm not going to be cured. I don't want to be cured. It is like any other human specific difference, like sex and race. So when you talk about race, you have blacks, whites, Asians, you have South Asians, you have Chinese race. So these are differences. But how often have you found us? We have. Definitely we talk about, oh, white races. That's where racism comes from. We are the most superior. But of course, everyone realizes that when you say one race is superior to other, it is racism. Similarly, if you say neurotypical brain is superior to neurodiverse brain, it is bigotry, not science, not psychology anymore. You're using psychology, you're using science to justify that bigotry. Okay. And while I am giving the examples of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, I want you to know that these are not the only neurodiverse conditions. These are the three conditions that I am most familiar in, and that's why these examples come easier to me. So what I've told you so far is diversity is the rule of nature. And neurodiversity is just one of the new additions in number of diverse naturally occurring conditions that we have in humanity. Okay, now the question is, okay, so, and I'm sure this is a paradigm shift, so there are going to be lots of confusion and questions, and I'm glad that if you're going through a lot of questions and confusion. So one of them would be, okay, so you're saying they're not mental illnesses, you're saying that they're not mental disorders. Does that mean autism is not a disability? People with autism do not experience suffering, impairment, some sort of restriction in activities. They do not experience, or let's say, dyslexia. Are you saying that dyslexic kids can't read, and because they can't read, but it's not a disability that they can't read? So let's examine this question. Disability. Is autism, ADHD, and dyslexia disability? Why not? But for that, I would like you to speak. And please participate in this discussion. You will understand a lot if you participate. Otherwise, I can just give you one directional kind of a lecture and go away. Now, there are two conditions. Let's say someone has polio or cerebral palsy, or let me just say someone is a wheelchair user, and someone who has myopia. How many of you wear specs in class?
Ma'am, I do. I do.
If you were to peg a number of your entire department, percentage wise, how much percentage would you say are people who wear specs? 40%, 30%, 60%, 50%, half people, or lesser? Any guess? Doesn't matter. I'm just asking you. You don't have to be accurate here. Okay, so people are pegging 30% to 70%, let's say. So 3 out of or 7 out of 10 people, that's quite a range so far. So disability. I can't perform something. I'm restricted in doing something. And I have -6 number. I'm myopic. I'm wearing contact lenses right now. Am I disabled? Would you say people who wear specs have disability?
No, not really.
Okay, so I'm just going to take up any random names from here and just ask you why do you think? So Gopan, since you were giving the speech, I remember you. So tell me, why do you think yes? Why would you say yes?
In compared to a normal ability of an eye, which is an organ, my eye's ability is quite different. That's why there is a correction that is needed, external correction like spectacles or a lens that is needed in order for me to adapt and function that is required of the organ to perform. So it is disability, isn't it?
Okay. So your answer is that typical people have an eyesight which is 6/6. Compared to that standard, my eyesight is weaker. I'm not able to do what average people can do. Okay, average, that's what our standards are based on: blood sugar levels, BP, the number of normal eyesight, etc. So the normal concept of normal is on the basis of the average, and you are saying I'm not able to, so therefore I can say that I have disability. Gargi, why would you go for no?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I have never thought of myopia as a disability. It's more like a disease. That's what I have been taught. So I said no. Like even in bio class, if you think about it, we've always been taught that it's a disorder of the eyes. So not exactly a disability.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Okay. I think one thing that you can probably ponder upon after the session is done is all these definitions. Is there a difference between disability, disorder, disease? And what is the difference? What would mean disability? What would mean an impairment? Is there a difference between impairment and disability? These are some very important things I think all of you need to kind of ponder upon. So let me take up another, Jayashri, why would you say no?
It can be corrected and it doesn't really affect your regular activities as much as it affect, like as much as other disabilities affect. If you wear spectacles or lenses, yeah, you're done. You can go ahead with your thing. So that's why I said no.
Perfect. So your answer is that I don't think it's a disability because it is corrected through spectacles and it doesn't restrict my everyday functioning. That's your answer. I beg to differ. My everyday functioning is affected. I can't go swimming. I get up every morning and if I can't find my spectacles, I'm extremely, almost helpless. I have to call my mother to help find my spectacles. And so in many ways, yes, I would say that my activities are affected, but there is again a comparison that you have in your head that it is not compared to what your understanding of disability is, which was probably be someone with blindness, visual impairment, someone with hearing disability, someone who's a wheelchair user. You would say that the restriction that I face because I can't see as well as typical human beings can, average human beings can. And by the way, average human beings are wearing spectacles today with all the screen time that we have. But whatever eyesight, I believe medical sciences believe one's supposed to have. So if I'm not compared to, what was I saying? Yes, if you compare wheelchair users to, so you would say that wheelchair users face a lot of restriction in their activities compared to me who has to wear spectacles. Would you agree with that? That there is more restriction of activities for a wheelchair user than it is for someone who wears spectacles or who has myopia. Would you agree?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you can use the chat box also. It's more like you have a easier and a quick fix for myopia rather than it affecting or not affecting the daily life. Because there is a quick fix, it's not affecting you, right? That's the whole point.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Now I'm going to leave you with this question that I want you again to take at least a minute to think of. The restriction of activity that comes with being a wheelchair user. What is the cause for that? What is the cause for restriction of activity that comes with being a wheelchair user?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's not considered normal, because normal people can walk, like for example, not a lot of places have a ramp to go into, or all they have on staircases. So normal people can climb up the stairs, but people with disability aren't normal. So, and normal people are more in numbers, so they don't really consider people with disabilities. And
I think you've touched upon quite a few interesting points that again people should think about. So you said normal people, and again the concept of normality is a question mark over here. I would like to use the word majority. That's a better word for me. Majority of people can walk, and therefore instead of ramps, majority of buildings, especially in our country, have stairs and may not have ramps. Go walk outside your home, your house building, your college, your schools, your markets, your any public space. What extent are they designed for the majority, and to what extent do they cater to minority of people who are wheelchair users? That's one question. Yeah. Tell me. Please speak.
Very few places have ramps as such, but this is not viewed like, it's not stigmatized as other things is. It's just it's just considered as a disability, and since very few people according to the society have it, they just ignore.
Interesting. So very few people, someone said 70% of people probably wear specs. So that means myopic people are in majority. The world revolves around majority, especially powerful majority. So the world is designed for people in power. The world is designed for majority of people, which is people who wear spectacles. Whereas people who are wheelchair users are a minority. The world is not designed for them. First. Anything else you'd like to add? If someone talked about taboo, is it really a taboo to wear specs? No.
No, it's actually starting to become a fashion trend right now.
Exactly. It is a fashion trend. When I was really young in school, and this very popular Bollywood movie had come out, Kaho Na Pyar Hai, with Hrithik Roshan in it. The Hrithik Roshan plays a character who wears rimless glasses, and if you remember, women went crazy about his character, and lots of people started using zero power glasses. Basically, it was fashionable to, it still is fashionable to wear glasses, and we have so much of rimless, cat eyes, and newer kinds of glass, spectacles that come up. Every 3-4 years, I want to change my spectacles because I want to see, okay, this is not in fashion anymore. I want to wear more fashionable glasses. How many of you have associated using wheelchair out of fashion? You can't, but just like, zero power glasses, you just want to, it's fashionable for you to. There is no glamorization. There is no, and it's not that it needs to be glamorized. I'm talking about taboo here, stigma here. Yes, of course, being spectacle is related to being brainy or intellectual. And let me also remind you, so how many of you, let me also remind you that it's not that wearing spectacles was always not seen as a sign of taboo. For women, in a matrimonial setup, it is advised that you don't wear specs because you will not be selected for matrimony if you wear specs. You should wear lenses. At least that's what's believed. And my own experiences say that. So when I was younger, earphones had just come out, and Walkman and earphones. And my grandparents wanted to take me to their village, native village, to meet people. And I was very excited because it was a 2 hours journey, and I thought I'm going to listen to my Walkman, as a kid, very excited, and, with earphones and all. And my grandparents, and probably a lot of, especially people back in village, now it's different thing with social media, everything, newest trends are kind of everywhere. But at that point of time, nobody really not a lot of people, especially in rural area, would get the concept of a Walkman or a earphone. So my grandmother told me, don't wear your earphones. People would think our daughter has a hearing impairment because they would think that this is a hearing aid. So for women, spectacles or even earphones can become a form of, something that affects our life, that restricts us in life, something that brings with it taboo or shame attached to it. So think about this. Now, coming back to the question, what is restricting the mobility of someone on a wheelchair? Is it really the fact that they can't use legs like normal people can? Or I use the word majority of people can? Or is it because the world is not designed for people who can't walk? Okay, so this is the question. And with that question, I'm going to talk about the biological and medical model, which I think most of you are going to be exposed to, especially because you're doing BSc, versus the social model of disability. The biological model says that you have a disability. Another thing I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, is nobody says that it's your past life karmas, that's why you got spectacles. But we have these horrible notions about karma being responsible for why you're blind, why you can't walk, why you can't hear. In US, UK, for instance, if you at every red light or crossing, you have a small machine where someone with visual impairment can go and just touch, and when they touch, they can feel when it is red light and when it is green light, thereby making them more independent. Recently, I was reading an article which talked about how, at least in Delhi, these people, wheelchair users, people, they were interviewed about the ease of how easy public transportation is for them. And they said that, the buses don't never stop for us. They see us and they kind of drive ahead. Even when they stop, the conductor is clueless about ramp. They don't know, they would say that we don't know where ramp is. And so they have a very hard time using public transport and travel. So many people said, some of my students said, ma'am, when you use spectacles, your vision is restored. That doesn't happen in case of this polio or wheelchair user. Your mobility is not restored. And my question is, my mobility is not restored. True. But what is the cause behind that? What is the cause behind my lack of education as a disabled person? My lack of, so even how many people would be okay with marrying someone who has myopia versus marrying someone with disability? So it affects my job opportunities, it affects my education, it affects my life. But the question is it because the polio affects my life, or is it because of the social model, that social barriers that I experience every day as a disabled person, including prejudice, stereotypes, discrimination, inaccessible buildings, inaccessible environment, lack of services. Basically, in spite of all the court orders, we still don't have a country that caters to all places are equally accessible for people with all kinds of abilities. Are you with me so far?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna talk about autism. And I'm going to give you a case of a child with autism. And this was one of my students, no, not my student, sorry, someone I'd invited for a talk. She was a social worker into policy work. And as a social worker, she went to a village in South India, someplace, I'm forgetting where. And there she and her friends found a child tied to this small hut, a bed there, place there. Next, he was tied to the bed in a smallish house hut kind of a setup, and crying away, and must have been 3-4 years old or something. And of course, the first response that you have is, oh my God, the parents are so cruel. They've tied up someone with a disability. And so individualistic psychology focuses on the problem, the mother or the father who did this to this child who's different, who has disability, who has, let me use the word that most people would, abnormality. But when they inquired about the case was this, that this was a single mother. She was thrown out of her house because her husband and his family didn't want to have a child with special needs, different child. They wanted her to abandon the child. She didn't. She was thrown out. She came back home. Her parents refused to accept her, which is the case for most women in our country. People are okay with dead daughters, but not divorced daughters. They could not afford to keep her or her child also. Lack of education, everything, and old age combined together. She had to take up a job to support herself and her child while living with her parents. And the job that she did was, she had to travel long distance. Of course, there was no creche in that job, so she couldn't take the child with her. Even if she could, it's the abnormal child. It's the child that every mother no mother wants their child to associate with. It's the bad child, the naughty child, the pagal bachcha, jise hum bolte hain. Pagal, we use pagal very casually as a word. So she had to leave. There was no school. There was no help available. There was no school available in the village. There was no school specifically. There was no school for different kids. Kids with different needs. There were no teachers. The neighbors refused to. The way we treat mental illnesses in our society, mental disorders. Now the question here is, again, is autism a mental disorder? It is a difference. Let me put it that. The way we see different people, we don't see different people as different. We see them as weird, scary, and we like to maintain our distance. So there is no neighbor where she can. So a lot, like my father, he grew up in a village. Basically, all the children of 2, 3, 4 village, houses, they grow up together playing, and there'll be one adult there, and all the other ladies would have gone to the, for farming, etc. They'd come back in the afternoon, sit together, eat. So basically, it was a how do I put this? It takes a village to raise a child kind of literally situation. But nobody wants to associate with this child. Nobody knows how to deal with the child. Nobody knows what the child's problem is. For them, the child is dangerous, scary, angry, can't handle, etc. Now, think about this. Who is responsible here? What do we do? Do we really blame the mother? If she would not tie up the child would run around and roam around, and there is a huge chance of him getting lost. And parents were too old to look after, so she had to tie the child and go for work. It is a choice between hunger and care for the child, physical care for the child. Who do you think is responsible? Where do you think the disability lies? Inside the child or inside our social structures and systems?
Inside our education and the way we are raised, the way we are taught, which is normal. I think mostly generally we assume that a child has a prize. Like if the child gets more marks, the parents are giving are getting a good remark, and they mostly pressurize the child to go for something unique, go for something more normal or high standard, which has good remark in the society. That they forgot that even the child has his or her own dream.
Yes.
They usually forget what it is to be a child. So I think it's basically the education and the way I think we really need to understand how to accept things. If we try to accept the child is like this, we need to help it. You will, the child may have a better future perhaps.
Right. Samyukta, you've shared some beautiful things, including the first thing that I'll pick up right now, which is we have a definition of normal. Everyone does, and everyone suffers because of it. What is the normal career to have? What is the normal age to get married at? What is the normal, subject to take up? What is the normal way to behave? What is the normal gender to be attracted to? We have a concept of normal, and anyone who falls outside that domain suffers. It is a problem of how we define normalcy at the end of the day. And secondly, I completely agree with the fact that it's not just helping the child. I think helping has a different connotation. It is understanding the child. There is no helping. Sometimes you have to help ourselves. What does that mean? It's not always the child that has to be fixed to fit into the world. Sometimes and oftentimes the world needs to change and mold itself to fit into someone's way of being. We put too much of ownership with the child, that you need to look at my eyes and talk. That's a very common thing people do to autistic people. Why aren't you looking at my eyes and talking? Why should I look into your eyes and talk? I can focus and pay attention without looking at you. If you think that means not listening to you, but that is your definition of what not listening is. I, in fact, listen better when I don't look into your eyes. And I can attest to that personally. I have had huge anxieties associated with public speaking before the pandemic. After the pandemic, I've been giving so many sessions that I don't think I experience anxiety anymore. What do you think changed for me? Any guesses?
The fact that you don't have to look at people and talk.
Exactly. That I'm literally talking to my laptop. It's easier than looking at 150 people sitting in front of me in an auditorium and talking. So if I do feel anxious looking at people and talk, and if I was giving you a speech, let's say looking away, would you think that ma'am is so abnormal? 100%. You would label me abnormal. She's not looking, you would not care about what I'm speaking because I spoke all of that not looking at you. And you would say she's abnormal. She probably has a problem. Who said we have to hug? I don't like a lot of people with, autism do not like sensory touch. They're not comfortable with it. Imagine being born in a world where hugging was abnormal. Who do you think would be given ABA to treat this sensory issues? The person with autism or you? So sensory difficulties in autism, again, I'm using these as examples. Sensory difficulties in autism is something that DSM only added in DSM-5, which is 2013, which means that for me, I sense the world differently from how you sense the world. So right now, if I look outside my window, it's not too sunny. It's okay. It's like 4:30-ish kind of sun. Okay. But for someone with autism, this sunlight could be the same as what happens in Delhi in June. Extremely bright. It's so difficult to open your eyes. You can't drive without sunglasses. But would you think that I'm abnormal because I'm wearing sunglasses in June and driving? No. Would you think I'm abnormal if I'm sitting in classroom and wearing sunglasses? Yes. Because you can't see how I process information. You can't see how I sense the world. The world for me is too bright. And the world is designed around your sensory needs, not my sensory needs. The world is too loud. Have you noticed that a lot of your dogs get extremely uncomfortable around Diwali? At least in North Delhi, we are infamous for all the firecrackers that we burn. Dogs and animals, because they can sense the voices too loudly, it gets very, it can get very painful for them. They're scared, they sit in a corner and, you try to lock the door so that they get least amount of voice. We understand dogs because we know that the dogs, why do we empathize with dogs? Because we know that the dog is sensing the world differently. We don't empathize with an autistic child who suddenly does this. For us, this child is abnormal because I do not know that for this person, this sound is too loud. If all of us were autistics and only few people like you, the so-called normal people, existed, I would have designed a world where I was not experiencing sounds as loud as this. What are the various sounds that I hear? Machine, you can constantly hear someone constructing something in the background. Machines, cars, music, maximum voice, minimum voice. The world is designed for neurotypical people. Now I'm going to show you are you with me so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to show you a very small video and then I'm going to ask you a question. This one. Let me know if the video is not working.
Ma'am, is there an audio for the? We can't hear the audio.
Sorry?
We can't hear the audio.
You can't hear the audio. Let's just try this again.
No, ma'am, it's still not heard.
Let me.
Ma'am, maybe you can try sharing again with the audio.
Sorry?
You can try sharing again after clicking the option enable audio sharing also.
1 second. I'll try another one. Generally it works. Yes, let me see. Stop sharing. Can you hear this? Is this audible for you?
No, ma'am.
No? That's very odd. Okay, so let me just show you this without the sound. I think you'll get the gist. Otherwise, I'll explain what was happening.
Nine. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. I just get too much information.
Okay. So what happened is that what you didn't hear here was all the sounds, very loud sounds that were happening. You definitely saw that the child, so you saw from the child's perspective how
we are all different, and that's wonderful.
Yeah. So you saw it from the child's perspective, how the world is for people with autism. It was just an illustration. And then you saw it from an external person's perspective, the lady in the end who makes a face, right? So my question is that sensory difficulties have always been there in people with autism, but it is only in DSM-5 that we included it as we recognized it, acknowledged it, and included it as a criterion that, oh yes, people with autism experience sensory difficulties. It was not in DSM-4, it was not in DSM-3. Now, based on what you saw, what could be the possible reason for this? What could be the reason? Anyone, any guesses? I'm wondering if someone is typing. Okay, so people with autism are not the ones who are researching on autism. They've not been the ones who are driving the narrative of autism. They've not been included in the study of autism. And autism can be replaced by ADHD or dyslexia for that matter. And therefore, we have an outsider's gaze to autism. What is the outside? We have a neurotypical gaze to autism. And from the outside, this is a naughty child from the neurotypical gaze. But it was only when lots of self-advocates with autism started speaking up, writing, blogging, having themselves heard, is when I realized that this behavior that the child is exhibiting is not disruptive behavior. It's not with the motivation of disturbing people, hurting people, harming people. It is because the child's brain is overwhelmed with all the stimulation. So we could only see the outside. And till date, DSM or ICD is biased to the neurotypical gaze. Thankfully, we have lots of people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, who are researching on autism, ADHD, and dyslexia now. They are psychologists, they are psychiatrists, they are on the round table, they're part of conferences. In fact, their motto is nothing about us without us. You cannot say one thing about what autism is without involving us in the conversation. You do not get to decide about autism without our voices, right? Now, coming back to disorder or difference, I'm going to share a very creepy story I heard some time ago. It's about a man who's gone hiking and he gets lost on way and he comes across an isolated tribe. Do you understand what are uncontacted isolated tribes? Do you get what is an uncontacted isolated tribe?
Those who are not integrated into the society or not connected with the regular society.
Right. So these are people who've not been contacted. These are a group of people who are living away from so-called civilization. And so it's this kind of a tribe he comes in contact with, and they are congenitally blind, which means all of them are born without eyes, right? So this person who has eyes goes to the tribe, he stays with them, and of course he's given a very warm welcome, etc., which is so what does he start talking about? Oh, the sun is out, it's cloudy today, it's night, we should probably sleep. Look, the color of this flower is so beautiful. Now for a community that can't see, nobody can see, has no concept of seeing something, what do you think they will say? How do you think they'll assess this behavior?
They'll probably call him a weird, and then probably tell that this guy who's come from outside is very new, and he's telling new things that they can't accept.
Right. So most likely he'll be judged as weird, as unusual, which is what happened. They thought that this poor person has some kind of a mental defect. And they realized that his mental defect is coming from something here and here. Two things. They end up operating him and removing his eyes. And then they were like, now we've made you normal. Now you fit into our definition of normal. And mind you, they did it all out of his well-being and his concern. They were not trying to torture him. So this is the question of normals. Neurodiversity is a question of normality. And how do we define normality? And let's not even brag about how the fact that we've not had, sorry, let me put it another way. A lot of my students, when we have a critical outlook towards psychology, they feel that these are things that we've never really heard in our field, or at least they're repressed, they're not talked about a lot, right? Like our relationship with queerness as a discipline is definitely controversial and unethical, and has contributed to every time in our country today. It's not rare that you hear people say that, oh, I took him to a psychiatrist because he's homosexual. And the psychiatrist, now of course psychologists are accepting and promoting the idea that there's nothing wrong with being homosexual, but there will still be few psychiatrists today who will advocate for conversion therapy, who will say that this might be an illness, and which was much more common previously. So in 1970s, APA was having a convention where they were having a panel discussion on homosexuality, which is where the gay task force came. And the gay task force are people protesting for homosexual rights in 1970s at that time. And they protested against this kind, that homosexuality is not a mental illness. And by 1973, APA board unanimously removed homosexuality as a mental disorder in DSM-3. What happened in 3 years? Do you think science just changed in 3 years? Because we are a scientific discipline after all. So do you think in 1970s, I had evidence for homosexuality as mental illness? In 3 years, that evidence just vanished? what happened is that people who were homosexual, they protested. They refused to accept a narrative created by a bunch of people who said that I am a scientist, I am a psychologist, I know better about your life than you do about your life. One thing. I've already talked about gender dysphoria, so I won't pick that up again. Let's talk about left-handedness. How many of you are left-handed here?
I am.
About 10% people are left-handed. And are you pure left-handed, or are there people who write from right and pick up food and other things from left?
No. I'm purely left-handed.
Sure.
Though
Anyone?
I can do few tasks in right as well, but I majorly use my left hand.
Right. What about anyone knows anyone who's kind of like mixed, writing from right, eating from left?
Yeah, I know a few of my friends. They are actually left-handed, but at home they converted them to right-handers. So now they write in their right hand, but
Right. Hisham, if I'm pronouncing your name right, please correct me. So can you tell us more if you write from your right or left? How's that for you?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I write from my right, then I play cricket from the left, and I play football with the left, and then I skateboard also with my left foot, but mostly doing artwork or other stuff like that, I use my right hand.
Right. So, have you always been using the both, hands, or was it because your parents told you had an inclination to left, and then they told you, no, use your right, don't use left, and then you started using both, kind of thing?
Yeah, generally my parents asked me to do most of my activities with my right hand, but they didn't really mind me using my left foot for things. So I guess it might have been because of that.
Do you think you were naturally a lefty that were converted into a righty?
Oh yeah, actually, I had a fracture in my left hand. So when I was really young, so that might be a reason why my hands alone, I use my right hand and not my left hand.
Okay. So you are talking about fracture. But do you
Yes.
think there has always been a bias towards the left hand, where we think the left is inauspicious, and you're not supposed to take any kind of holy thing in your left hand. You should put forth the right hand. And there has been a pressure on teachers and parents also. Don't let your child be a lefty, make them a righty, force the child. Many children are forced to not, when they're naturally inclined to pick up things from the left hand, they're told, no, use your right hand. This is better. How do we define better? And that's why and there were lots of these punishments also, where the hands would be hit of the child again and again and again. It was painful, and they're painfully converted into your righties, because there has been a belief that people who were left-handed were evil. And there's been obviously a variation in that understanding. For us, we do not think left hand is auspicious. We think it is right hand is more auspicious, and therefore if a child becomes a lefty, it will be inauspicious or something. What is the difference between anyone who your BSc bio science, more orientation towards the sciences and psychology? What is the difference between a left-handed and a right-handed individual when it
a left-hander uses the right hemisphere of the brain more, whereas the right-hander uses the left hemisphere of the brain more.
I would like to correct this. Use of brain more is not the correct thing here, because
it's more active in that person. If I'm right.
Yes, a part of the brain is active. The language centers for a right hand is in the right-handed people is in the left hemisphere, whereas the language centers of the left-handed people are in the right hemisphere. Essentially, your brain is different. And the world is again made for right-handed people. I'm an invigilator in exams. I have but a few left-handed students who come up and say they can't write with a table that is made for right-handed people. Scissors.
Yeah, that's very difficult. I've gone through that in almost all classes.
Exactly. So it's about majority and minority. And minority tends to be associated with things like abnormality, impure, superstitions, beliefs, evil, there's a lot of conjecture on part of the majority about the minority or the other. I won't use the word minority here, about the other. The entire experience is that we label people as others, and the norm is us. The norm is the normal people, right? So I wanted to talk about, now coming back to, let's say, neurodiversity, neurotypical gaze. We have a lot of misunderstanding. The way a discipline understands ADHD, autism, and dyslexia, thoroughly inefficient. And I can say that today. I have spoken to many neurodiverse people. I have I have read many books written by people who are neurodiverse. They're speaking for themselves. They're saying things, but we're not listening, including things like significant distress. Who defines significant distress? My friend with ADHD went to a psychiatrist who, not out of his own fault, but because of his own training, he talks about, you've not failed enough classes. You don't look hyper enough. You have not lost enough jobs for us to say you have significant distress to be called, someone with ADHD. But the things that he experiences, ADHD is a misnomer, by the way. It's not attention deficit. It is a dysregulated attention. A child with ADHD can focus if you are interesting enough as a teacher. So basically, children with ADHD are demanding more interesting classrooms, but it is easier for us to just say that he has a problem instead of modifying ourselves and our entire structure and system of doing things. For instance, I've met principal who was very understanding of, not coming from psychology background, but very understanding of ADHD and different conditions in children. Condition is the word, I don't use the word disorder. And she said that, I've told my teachers that if you have a hyper kid in your class, whether they have diagnosed ADHD or not, doesn't matter. But if a child is too hyper, instead of constantly, and if you look at kids with ADHD, they're just kids, bouncy, jumpy, that's the thing that we have. But instead of acknowledging that this kid is hyper because of an understimulated brain, we tend to call the child names like battamiz, you're doing it deliberately, not listening, thereby. So the kind of negative feedback a child with ADHD gets, it leads to extremely poor sense of self-esteem as the child grows up, because the child doesn't know what is he or she doing wrong. He's trying to sit down, but he can't help it but be jumpy. He's trying to be quiet, but he can't help it. So the principal said that, I tell my teachers, if you have a hyper kid, maybe after every half an hour, the period over, send him out send him out on deliberate small tasks, like go to staff room, give ma'am this and come back. Very clear, short instructions. So the whole point is that let him be hyper, let him take out that energy. Or if you tell regular kids to do 2 rounds of the sports field, give him 3. The whole idea is that the principal was trying to accommodate rather than say that this child has a problem and we can't do much about it. So accommodating to the child rather than fixing the child is a very important aspect of neurodiversity. So what might seem that you are lazy, for someone with ADHD, the paralysis is too real, something that we don't, because we do not think about the lived experiences of people. We do case studies. And case studies are the neurotypical gaze. What can I see from outside this person? When you read books, blogs, interviews of people with ADHD, you will have a much better understanding of the condition than any clinical psychology book I can prescribe to you right now. And I'm especially about these conditions, whether my approach about lived experiences for all conditions, but I'm going to stick to ADHD, autism, and dyslexia right now. So from the outside, it looks like this child is disorganized, this child is hyper, this child doesn't listen. By the way, how did we discover stimulants as children or people with ADHD? 80% of them benefit from stimulant medications. And this has been very unique thing, that if the child is hyper, why are we stimulating the child more? Why are we giving stimulants to the child? Right? I don't know how many of you know that we give stimulants for ADHD. Now the answer is that in 1940s, most of these medications that we have for different disorders, they've been discovered through serendipity. They've been discovered, let's see, let's check, let's, like something like antidepressants were first actually drugs for anti-tuberculosis, and then they realized it had a positive, impact on someone's mood. So we started using them as antidepressants. Similarly, in 1940s, there was a residential school for disturbed children, or children who were disturbing or aggressive or hyper. What would be ADHD today? And over there, the doctor, the psychologist, psychiatrist, or medical professional that was there, he happened to give some of these kids stimulant medications and realized that they calmed down, their behaviors calmed down, they became less aggressive, more focused. So essentially, it's a different brain. It is a dopamine deficit brain. It works differently. Instead of calling it abnormal, impaired, because our standard of normalcy is typical, we need to understand how that functions. As teachers, as psychologists, as educators, as anyone who's associated with with children with different needs, you must familiarize yourself with neurodiversity, so that you do not end up communicating to a child that the child is broken, that you are broken, you are lesser, you're abnormal. It's very important for a child to understand that they are different and that difference counts as a disability, not because their brain disability lies in the brain wiring. It lies in the social barriers that the world has, including one of the biggest one being lack of understanding. We are still trying to cure autism. For people with autism, to cure them is genocide, which basically means like Down syndrome. If tomorrow I discover gene of autism, what do you think people coming from non-neurodiverse paradigm gonna do? Just like the way we did with Down syndrome, that we abort the child. So tomorrow, if I can test and assess that this child will have autism tomorrow, I'm gonna not have any autistic population in the near future because I have killed them in womb. With the idea that they are different, they are deviant, and justified by this child will have a lot of suffering growing up. Question being, can we even quantify suffering? As a woman, I undergo a lot of suffering because of my gender, but it's still nice to be alive. I wouldn't want to be killed. These are some very important questions that actually go beyond the purview of just 1 hour of our discussion. So from a neurodiverse paradigm, diagnosis is liberation. Diagnosis is getting an answer for why you've been different. Diagnosis is understanding that aha experience. Oh my God, makes sense now. And so many adults diagnosed were as neurodiverse. Today, it's a whole lot of grief. It's a grief of the lives that they could have had if they would have already known that they were different. It's the grief of being constantly criticized and told they're a bad friend, they're a bad student, they're bad human beings. By this, it's the parent and child conflict that has been there for the longest time because of being different. You can't do this, you don't do that, you do this deliberately every time. The parent and child conflict becomes it's quite a feature of people who are different, because the no parent wants to do this to their child, which is continuously treat them as abnormal. But the pressures of normalcy are so much. Parents themselves are okay with trying to fix their child into normal, just so that he should not act differently, he should not behave differently, because we're so scared of the different. I'm gonna just quickly, I realize I'm running out of time. I'm gonna ask you one question because there's so much more to discuss. You've seen people with autism rocking back and forth, right? You've seen them hand flapping, jumping, hand flapping, repetitive, which is what we call repetitive behavior. Okay. How many of you shake your legs while sitting?
No, I do.
I used to.
I do, ma'am.
You do? Okay.
I used to do it, but it was stopped.
Okay. Tell me something, is shaking of legs really that bad? Is there something wrong with shaking of legs? Have you had people who put their hand on your leg and almost violated your boundaries, physical boundaries, and asked you to not shake it?
Yes, they tell that it's annoying for them.
Why is it annoying for them? Okay, I can understand if I'm sharing a table with someone and me moving my leg is shaking their table and disturbing them. That I understand. But if I'm just shaking my leg and sitting, you are disturbed by it, look away. You have no right to touch me, tell me I'm wrong or I'm abnormal or I have problems. I have anxiety. I could be bored. I have a habit. Why do we do repetitive behaviors? Superstitions, of course. We are a very funny bunch of people. I come from an extremely dysfunctional family where we'd be fighting every single day, but the cause of the fighting was that chappal that is not straight in our homes. So, repetitive behavior, is it really that bad? When a child can't sleep, what do? You pick up the child and you do this to the child. What is this? This is a repetitive behavior. You put the child in a crib and you shake the crib left and right. Right? Repetitive behaviors help us relax. It helps eases our anxiety. We pace up and down when we are anxious. Why people are disturbed with your leg? Because it makes them anxious. Your coping mechanism is hurting them. And because everyone doesn't do that, you still get pressurized and you're not empowered enough to say, please look away. Don't touch me ever again. I'm going to do this. Same thing happens with people with autism. This helps them ease their anxiety. But for a parent, this is abnormal. So don't do this. Sit straight. Look into my eyes. Don't be abnormal. Why can't you be normal? Why do you have to always be like this? So the role that psychologists play in producing and replicating this normalcy needs to be looked at. And that's the crux of my talk today. I wish I had more time to speak about all of these things, including why Greta Thunberg, who has autism, and we would like her to be there. It's in question of genocide. And if you compare her to someone with no identifiable disorder as Donald Trump, who's more valuable to human civilization? Greta Thunberg says, who's an environmental activist, that it's her autism that is one of her strengths that has led her to become a climate change activist at a young role. Some of you may know about what's his name? Forgetting his name. Yes, Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps has ADHD, and if you get time, please read upon how swimming and ADHD are connected for Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps is someone who has maximum number of gold medals in swimming. Right now, towards the end, now before I end this conversation, I would like to hear what are your questions, what are your comments, because I have definitely, for some people who've never heard of neurodiversity, this would be a paradigm shift for you. Yes, which fidget spinners are based on exactly that. Yes, that's true. Self-stimulation, stimulatory behavior. Who's going into depth? You'll run away from your home if you shake your. These are some very funny things. Anyway, any questions? I want to end this, but before I end it, I would like to hear what's your opinion. What are you thinking? Does this make sense to you, or is it too critical a paradigm for you? Have you been team cure for so long that, oh no, we need to cure? Curing, for many people, curing autism is the same as curing homosexuality or curing being a woman. It is part of my identity. I don't get cured of being a woman. I don't get cured of homosexuality. I don't get cured of autism. And when you say that, it is humiliating and insulting. Right. So, since some of you seem extremely shy, or either I think I've stupendified.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. I actually never heard of the term neurodiversity before, but after the session, I think I've never realized all this has going on. Like I've never thought like autism people face such kind of discrimination. Yes, they're seen differently, but I didn't know that they face discrimination blatantly as such. So it was a good eye opener, I think.
I believe so, because we've always kept ourselves holier than thou, that they face discrimination, but it's because of society. We never realize the role that we play as psychologists in contributing to that discrimination.
I actually have a question.
Mhm.
So here the basic idea, correct me if I'm wrong, the basic ideology is to normalize life for them, right? Or at least in their own terms.
Okay.
So we are showing how it's being autistic is not a disorder, but it's according to them, it's a normalcy, right? So how do we help them adapt to a different kind of normal that we see? How do we make life easier for them?
Interesting question. Probably the slide that we're at. What are we researching? What are we treating? The question, what are we treating and what are we researching? What do we treat? Is my treatment to make them normal, fit into my definition of normal, come close to the ideal type? Don't shake, look into eyes while talking. You should like hug. You should be okay with adapting to changes very quickly. Are we removing the traits that we dislike? And we're calling that intervention or not? So what do we do? Similarly, curing. There were 50 million, Autism Speaks as an organization that spent $50 million, which is around over 300 crores of rupees. And they tried to examine genomes of 10,000 individuals from families with 2 or more autistic children. And they thought that if we examine their genes, we'll be able to zero down on one or couple of genes for autism. And once we can couple that down, in future, we can remove autism through gene therapy. It was such a huge failure, this study, that they did not find any genetic factors that were common in even 1% of the children with the sample. Making people who were more on the neurodiverse paradigm add, do you know what all changes in society we could have done with those 340 crores of rupees? I could have given 1 million to every country in the world, at least to begin with, to train people to understand autism. I could have built parks, children centers, halls, movie halls that are based keeping in mind the needs of children with autism. There are there in US, few of them, where something like Frozen would be shown with, the sensory, etc., not to that level which a typical child enjoys, but for them. There are treats or autism retreat, where people with autism retreat and they create the sensory environment, and it's all done by, it's a retreat where people with autism come together, interact, have a community, etc. So schools, training of teachers, spreading information about autism, the very fact that talking about the social model of disability, researching in that area, the creating supporting communities. The cure for disabling aspects of autism will not be in pill, but in supportive communities. I don't suffer because I have autism. I suffer from living in a society that, see, whenever I tell them, I have a friend who is autistic and he's been wanting to date someone and he doesn't want to lie about his condition. He's like, every time I meet a woman and I tell her that, listen, I have autism, it's worse than corona. So I suffer because people don't want to understand differences. They're intolerant to differences. And that should be our site for change, not inside the body of someone with autism and inside the genes of someone with autism. Does that answer?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any other question that I could possibly address?
Excuse me, ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, please.
It's a pretty general question, but can you describe autism as a condition? And like many people describe it in different ways. So I want to know how you would describe it. And from that, I think I might have a question.
Right. Fine. Very interesting. Thank you for this Viva question. So, autism. People with autism, I would start with definitely the wiring is different from us. And initially, I would think as the wiring being deficient. We say they have social communication deficits. That's the term that DSM use, social communication deficits, which means that they can't read people's minds. And this is not my description. I'm telling you what DSM says, and then from that, I'll come to my understanding of it. They can't read the cues, bodily cues. So much of, sorry, let me first stop making this duck dance, swan dance. Yeah. So much of, where was I? About, yes, so much of communication is non-verbal. I look at, when I said that I I have less anxiety when I look at when I don't look at people, is because I don't pick up any cues. Who's interested, who's not interested, who is bored, who's what. And that's, but because I can sense, I can read, I can pick up these things. So if I'm someone sitting like that, I know that I've just done such a boring job of mine. And if someone's excited and looking at me and smiling and responding, I know I'm doing well. So these are things that nobody taught us. Did anyone tell you that this means someone's bored and this means attentive? Nobody told you that. This is a way our brain picks up, and 70% of our communication is nonverbal. People with autism, not so much. Their brains, instead of focusing on the larger picture, it focuses on it focuses on not the holistic but parts. They have part approach. That is why you'll find them to be excellent coders. That's why you'll find them to be excellent coders. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, your get his name, Microsoft person. Why? Because to do coding very well, one, they're very good with computers, and to do coding very well, you have to know minutest of changes in the codes that my mind can't see. Children with autism will spot smallest of differences. You were wearing a bindi yesterday, you're not wearing it today. So it is entirely a different way of direct communication. Let me talk about that. Many people with autism, they talk very directly. And unfortunately, for me, because I'm also a very direct communicator, I do not know how to mince my words and political correctness and all of that, do all this drama and jazz before I actually arrive at what I want to say. Unfortunately, a lot of communication is indirect. Many times when I say things very directly, people think I'm rude. Let's say if my friend has to say that they can't come with me to some place, they'd be like, do you think you want to go? Like today's going to be traffic there and this and that. And I would think, counting that they're being direct and they want to go, but it's traffic. No, there won't be any traffic. Yeah, we'll go. Don't worry about that. We'll go, we'll park, we'll take a cab and it won't. But do you think they'll make an excuse? I will not get that they are trying to get out of the situation, because I speak directly. If I don't have to go, I will say I don't want to go. But nobody likes this direct communication. Why, जैसे बोलते हैं हम लोग मुंह पे बोल देते हैं. So this directness, is it a difference or is it an abnormality? As a woman, I am extremely direct in my approach, and also, let's say, extremely assertive. But my assertiveness is aggressiveness for a lot of people who are not used to assertiveness in women. It is again the same feature being evaluated. It's so now coming to how do I describe autism? It's a different way of being. It's a different brain. It is a different way of being. And I need to understand it rather than, and that is very important. So I talk to people, I talk to friends who have ADHD. I talk to friends who have autism, and I make an effort to understand them. So when they are, let's say if they have a meltdown, which means their brain literally gets fired with all the information processing, blah, 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 blah. Someone with ADHD, how do I describe ADHD? ADHD is extremely creative brain. In an ADHD brain, you have, instead of my brain, I would probably have 2 or 3 thoughts. One, communication with you, one, something else going on, maybe another third or fourth, maximum 4 thoughts. An ADHD brain, multiple thoughts. And all their thoughts are flying at the speed of light. That leads to creativity. If anyone's ever creative, you would understand that too much is happening in your mind and your mind suddenly makes patterns out of things. A lot of people with ADHD are extremely creative people. I would describe it as that. So I would not use the word social communication deficits. I would say their social communication is different from ours. Yes, now your question. How did I score in your Viva? How well did I score?
I would say pretty well, ma'am.
Thank you. What is the question?
So the way you describe ADHD and autism as different, and so that can go for many other problems as well, right? So let's take an example of someone who's an amputee. So you would say, yes, so there's a competition, Olympics, and it's called Paralympics. It's for the people who are physically differently able. So let's say that a person who wins a lot of medals in that particular competition, he is doing well as how he is right now, with, let's say, one of his legs is not got, he lost it in an accident, let's say that. So he is living a different kind of life right now, but he's doing well in that. So in that kind of a situation, I think that would it be fine for us to say that he's different, and would it be fine for him to not have a prosthetic leg and to live with his how he is different right now? Would it be all right with like that, or will it be fine if he does get a better prosthetic leg? Or
very interesting question, actually.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it in this kind of a way, if you understand.
Yeah, of course, I understand. So I've just scored really well in Viva. I understand things. So now, if you talk about are they anti-medication? Are neurodiverse people anti-medication? So that would be a counterpart for your mental disorders, that so to speak, or mental conditions, so to speak. They say, no, we are not anti any treatment. We're anti-treatment that tries to fix us into what is considered to be normal when we're not that. So a person who's an amputee had 2 legs to begin with. He was not always someone with 1 leg. His normal is that, and you are trying to fix him into normal through that. These people have never been normal brained, so to speak. It's like if you judge a fish by its ability to climb trees, it will forever think it's stupid. Unless it meets, and this is again, I'm quoting, this is not my own quote, this is someone, an ADHD advocate's quote. She says, unless that fish meets other fishes and says that, and realizes that fishes are not supposed to climb trees, they're supposed to swim, and they do that damn well. So same thing over here is that ADHD brain is never a normal brain. So, but medication for, let's say, inattention. If my brain is apart, and ADHD is not just about inattention, let me also tell you that, but let me take up one thing that everyone knows very well, inattention. And if my mind can focus more with stimulants, function better, why would I not take that? Because, so I would of course take that. Just like if I have fever, if I have cough, or if I have, let's say, if I would take medications for that. But inattention is not all that is there. ADHD and autism are life. It affects your life like how? It affects your sleep. It affects your sexuality. It can affect it affects your executive functioning, your motivation, your transitioning from one, if you read entire gamut of executive functions that affect it. Planning, time blindness. Mujhe time nahi dikhta hai. How did one of my friends who I've been speaking for a very long time, who's been struggling with depression and anxiety, and this has been a common case with few neurodiverse people that I met. They were going to therapy for depression and anxiety, never realizing their brains are different. And it is these different brains that has caused, and the treatment that they've gotten for being different, that has led them to depression and anxiety. So this friend of mine I didn't, because I had grown up on a psychology that told me ADHD is a 5-year-old kid jumping from here and there. I had no idea. How many of you are ever going to be taught what adult ADHD looks like, what adult autism looks like? You won't be. You don't know. So when you come, even if you become practitioners, if you come across someone with adult ADHD, you'll miss that and you'll only see depression and anxiety. I had a student who's, struggling with, again, lots of therapists, depression, anxiety, blah, blah, blah. But she was a different kid, very bright, very different kind of a kid. And she wanted to talk to me when she spoke about her life. And that was also the time that I was doing my PhD work. So I was very in tune with Asperger's. Um, and I realized that she is Asperger's. And only recently, she graduated 3-4 years ago, she got herself assessed. I haven't asked her what came out of it, but she took her own time to accept, go through, but she did read about Asperger's, and that she said that some of these things do make sense to me. And coming back to, let's say, my friend. So I was talking to my friend for the longest time. I didn't know that this, with my 12, 13 years of, more than that years of experience studying psychology, that my friend has ADHD. So, but what happened was that he said something like, I lose track of time. I just go, he didn't use the word daydream, because daydream se mere ko trigger hota hai. Why? Because I have read daydreaming is one of the features of ADHD. He said, I lose time. I was supposed to go for an appointment, and 10 minutes later, I put my phone down and just forgot. I'm never on time, never on time. I struggle with time. I can't see time. I can't plan all these things. So it becomes extremely overwhelming. Emotional dysregulation, hugely there in ADHD. So time blindness is how I read about ADHD in one of the papers that I was reading in masters. And I said, what are you, like, time blind? He's like, exactly, that's my experience. I don't think I see time. I'm time blind. That's when it occurred to me, like, listen, and and that's when I asked him to read up on ADD. I read up on a lot of adult ADD, and I realized that this is neurodiversity. This is the problem is lack of acceptance. This was a different child whose parents always judged him for lazy, not working, not being like other kids, not being like other adults. And mind you, neurodiverse people are some of the kindest people that I've met. They're very, very, very compassionate, very caring, very sensitive to nature. Helps them. A lot of people, ADHD kids, are very close to nature, and some of them environmental activism and all, because there is research that says ADHD kids calm down in nature. Nature has a calming effect on them. Is this anywhere close to any kind of conversations we have in our classrooms? Not really, because we are seeing them just from that one fixed lens of DSM. So I would say there's hegemony of DSM. I'm not anti-DSM. I'm not anti the medical model. I'm just saying that it is a model. There are other perspectives. Can I get my swan to dance again? How many of you heard the story of Ugly Duckling? You've heard of Ugly Duckling?
Yes.
Great. Can someone just tell us about the story of Ugly Duckling? Anyone? Just very summary statement of what happened with Ugly Duckling. Who's the Ugly Duckling?
The first, it's actually a bird comes out of its egg near like a lot of ducks, and all the ducks were they are differently colored from the swan. The swan is very dark in color, and keeps getting thrown out of every place it goes to. And then when finally it reaches a pond where there are a lot of swans, and when it grows up, finally it becomes very beautiful, and it realizes that it is a swan and not a duck.
Very good. Thank you for that story. You've narrated it very well. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Do you get why I'm talking about the story here in this context of neurodiversity? maybe you're not an ugly duckling, maybe you're a swan. And if you've ever experienced any form of bullying because of any differences that you might have had, you have on the basis of being different, you would understand neurodiversity. You will accept, if at least have an open mind and explore this. And please, this is a wonderful area of research in future, and we need more work to be done in India. And I would welcome all of you to explore this paradigm and take it as part of your research work. There are lots of references. If you want, I can send you to, where to begin from, since you said that, you have never heard about it. I can give you some starting point, read this, read that. So, considering ADHD, autism, and similar disorders as diversity, which infers that social institutions, social sphere, gender must accommodate, does that also apply that they won't need therapy and psychological support? Not at all. Anyone can need therapy and psychological support. No. Why should I can need it for, if neurotypical people can need it, so can neurodiverse people. It is what is being said in therapy that matters. If in therapy it's said that you need to be more normal, that's problematic. If it's being said that in therapy that as a therapist, I'm helping someone, there are lots of ADHD coaches over there, therapists over there. There's been such a dearth of people in our country who understand neurodiversity as a paradigm. When I go to therapy as a neurodiverse person, I'm dealing with
Samyukta, your mic is on.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. As a neurodiverse person, when I first enter therapy, especially as an adult, I am going through years of low self-esteem, of not being good enough, of always being the odd one out, the weird one out, of not having friends is a neurotypical privilege. Sometimes people with autism, you've been told that they don't need friends. Everyone needs friends. They just find it difficult to make friends because we're quick to call that different kid in our class as weird, instead of calling them as accepting them, celebrating them. They have a different sense of humor, they're different, but we're just quick to say, like I said, different, therefore lesser. So what they definitely would need therapy inside. Why would I not extend it? But the paradigm of therapy can be neurodiverse or ABA, applied behavioral analysis. When I said ABA, it's applied behavioral analysis. You study the behavior, reinforce the right behavior. And so basically, I am reinforcing if the child looks at me and talks. Again, fixing the child to resemble more of the typical child. So, Gopan, I hope that answers your question. Great. So if there are no more questions, I think we have gone way beyond the time that was given to me. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other queries? We can drop my email ID over here. I should have written it on my slide. Sorry, I should have. I'll drop my email ID. You can email me. That's my name. It's Adhd. If you want a kind of or maybe I can share some of the reference links with your CR, your students, and then you can get it from them. So I just thank you. That's okay. I when I don't have much to talk about, I start. That's my thing. Anyway, go on. Yeah, I'm done. Over and out.
Thank you, Tisha ma'am, for joining us today. I think all of us learned something new today, and the way we look at things you've given us something new and to think about and to ponder, especially when you mentioned how different is not equal to lesser. I think that's something that a lot of us will think about today. And thank you for giving us a lot of insightful information. So now I would like to shift over to Amatullah to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Netra, and good evening, everyone. Respected and most distinguished speaker and chief guest of the World Mental Health Day at Madras School of Social Work, Dr. Ethisha Nagar, respected principal, dean, program head, honorable professors, and my dear friends. It seems to be my greatest honor to present the vote of thanks to our speaker and every one and all present here for gracing this occasion. Thank you, ma'am, for your extremely thought-provoking and interesting address. I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to our principal for gracing the occasion and making it a grand success. I'd like to thank all our faculties for guiding us throughout the event and helping us make it a grand success. I'd like to thank all the participants of the event for making it interesting and interactive. Finally, all the wonderful students who turned up and cooperated with us throughout the event. Once again, thank you all very much for a cordial cooperation. Thank you.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful interacting with all of you. I hope to see you again soon sometime, maybe, perhaps. All the best to all of you.
We have now come to the end of this event. I thank everyone for taking part in this insightful webinar and investigation. We can all log out now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Okay, I think all the others just logged in and left. Ma'am, Madhuri ma'am. Great show, guys. I mean, from start to finish, I think that the flow was great. Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, good job, guys. Excellent work.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. I think Ananya ma'am left. Yeah, I think every bit went on well. Thank you so much for emceeing, Netra. I think the run through twice helped a lot for picking up the energy levels, and others as well. Kalyani, Gargi, Jayashree, Abhinav. Others left. Gopan is here. Gopan left. Okay. Do you want to say something? How did you feel? How did it go?
It was nice, sir.
That was
It went well.
a very different topic. Didn't strike our mind many a times, right?
Yeah.
And Hisham was here. Hisham was asking for the definition. Actually, there's no definition because you can't define me, then you can't define that as well. So, so there shouldn't be a definition. Yeah, that was a very good question. All right, so we'll wind up.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Because from my side, it was a really good show, and we'll continue doing this for other events as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much. If Madhuri ma'am was there, she would probably give you more feedback, very specific feedback about, you know. So okay, we'll talk to you later. Thank you so much. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I did